Long before the mountains learned her name, Sabina Koenig had learned what it meant to be heard and still remain unseen. She was born in 1881 above a narrow bakery on the south side of St. Louis, where the air inside the family rooms always carried the mingled scents of yeast, coal smoke, cinnamon, and damp wool. Her father, August Koenig, rose before dawn to shape rye loaves beneath the yellow light of kerosene lamps. Her mother, Magdalena, kept the accounts, tended the ovens, and sang while she worked. She did not possess a trained voice, but she sang with such ease that even the delivery boys slowed their steps when they passed the open kitchen door. Sabina inherited her mother's voice and her father's sturdy frame. By the time she was 12, she was taller and broader than most grown women in the neighborhood. She had warm olive skin, thick black curls that resisted every pin, dark, expressive eyes, and a body that seemed determined to occupy the world without apology. Her shoulders were strong from carrying flour sacks. Her calves grew powerful from climbing the bakery stairs. Her rounded stomach and broad hips became the subject of whispers before she was old enough to understand why strangers believed her shape belonged to them. Her mother taught her to ignore the whispers. "People speak most carelessly about what they do not understand," Magdalena once told her. "You cannot spend your life shrinking every time a foolish person opens his mouth." Sabina wanted to believe her. At 14, she sang a hymn during a parish benefit after the scheduled soloist lost her voice. The church had been restless that evening. Children fidgeted, men cleared their throats, women waved paper fans against the summer heat. Then Sabina stepped forward, clasped her hands at her waist, and sang the first low note. The room changed. Her voice was not delicate. It did not float like lace or tremble like a bird. It filled the wooden church from floor to rafters. It was rich, controlled, and startlingly clear, with a depth that seemed too large to have come from one human chest. The organist nearly missed his entrance because he had turned to stare at her. Afterward, a music teacher named Elias Barrett approached August Koenig in the vestibule. "Your daughter has an instrument," he said. August glanced toward Sabina, who stood beside her mother accepting shy congratulations. "She already helps with the ovens." "I am not speaking about work," Barrett replied. "I am speaking about a gift." For the next several years, Sabina worked in the bakery by day and studied music in the evenings. She learned breathing, posture, Italian vowels, stage movement, harmony, and discipline. She discovered that singing well had less to do with force than control. A powerful voice required restraint. It required knowing when to release breath and when to keep it, when to trust the room, and when to bend the sound toward a single listener. At 19, she earned a place in the chorus of a small touring opera company. Her father worried that the stage was an unstable life. Her mother kissed her forehead, packed sweet rolls into a tin, and said, "Go find out how far your voice can travel." For nearly 10 years, Sabina traveled through Missouri, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. She sang in drafty theaters, crowded civic halls, improvised stages above saloons, and once inside a livestock pavilion after a roof fire forced the company from its regular venue. She endured late trains, cold dressing rooms, poor wages, and managers who treated performers as replaceable machinery. Still, she loved the moment before a curtain rose. In that darkness, the audience had not yet judged her. She was only breath, preparation, and possibility. Her voice earned her larger roles. She was praised in local newspapers for her range and emotional strength. Conductors trusted her. Other singers respected her discipline. Yet every time she was considered for a romantic lead, someone found a reason to object. She was told she looked too mature, though she was younger than the chosen soprano. She was told the costumes could not be altered. She was told audiences expected a particular silhouette. She was told her body distracted from the music. The final humiliation came in the autumn of 1909, during rehearsals for a new production in St. Louis. The company's owner, Lionel Voss, had promised Sabina the leading role after hearing her audition. For 6 weeks, she studied the score, rehearsed the scenes, and worked with the orchestra. 3 days before opening night, Voss summoned her to the empty theatre. He sat in the front row, with his hat resting on one knee. "You sing the role beautifully," he began. Sabina remained on the stage, still wearing her rehearsal shoes. "That sounds like the beginning of an unpleasant conversation." Voss exhaled through his nose. "Our investors attended rehearsal last night, and they have concerns. About the music? About the presentation?" Sabina understood before he continued. She had heard the language too many times. Voss stood and walked toward the stage. "The public must believe the hero would cross oceans for the woman he loves. And you believe no man would cross a street for me? I did not say that. You did not need to." He looked away, annoyed by her refusal to make the moment easier for him. "The theater is a business," he said. "Audiences have expectations. I am an opera singer. They should expect me to sing. They expect romance, illusion, beauty." Sabina felt the words strike, but she would not allow him to see where they landed. "And what do you expect me to do? You may return to the chorus. Your salary will remain unchanged." "My salary was supposed to increase with the role. That arrangement is no longer possible." Sabina slowly removed the ribbon that marked her place in the score. "Then neither am I." Voss stared at her. "Do not be foolish. Women would beg for your position. They are welcome to it. You will ruin your career over pride." "No," Sabina said. "You have mistaken dignity for pride." She left the score on the stage and walked out before her courage failed. For several months, she found temporary work singing at private dinners and teaching scales to the daughters of wealthy families. The money was unreliable. Her father had died 2 years earlier, and her mother's health had weakened. Sabina returned to the bakery and helped keep it open until Magdalena died in February of 1910. After the funeral, the rooms above the bakery became unbearably quiet. Sabina sold the business to a cousin, paid the remaining debts, and rented a small room near Union Station. She told herself she would audition again. She told herself one cruel manager could not decide the remainder of her life. Yet each time she unfolded a newspaper and saw an advertisement for performers, she remembered Voss's expression. Not hatred, not even disgust, something worse, certainty. He had spoken as though the world's rejection of her was an established fact. One rainy morning in April, Sabina found a notice printed in the employment section of a regional newspaper. Cook wanted for New Mountain Hotel. Room, board, and $35 monthly. Experience with large groups required. Rail fare reimbursed upon arrival. Apply by letter to E. Verleen, Western Cascade Development Company, Montana. $35 a month was better than most kitchen positions in St. Louis. The notice promised respectable accommodations and steady work. Sabina had spent her childhood feeding bakery crews and her adult years cooking in boarding houses between theatrical engagements. She knew how to stretch meat, judge an oven by touch, and prepare bread for 50 people without measuring a single ingredient. More important, Montana was far away. She wrote to Edgar Verleen that afternoon. His response arrived 10 days later on expensive stationery. He praised her experience, assured her that the hotel was nearly complete, and described a growing railway settlement in need of reliable staff. He included a one-way ticket and instructed her to bring warm clothing, because the mountain nights remained cold even in spring. Sabina studied the ticket for a long time. Her cousin warned her that advertisements could lie. "So can people standing directly in front of you," Sabina replied. She packed 2 dresses, heavy underclothes, a wool coat, sheet music, her mother's silver hair comb, and a small stack of family recipes. At the last moment, she added her old black performance gown. It no longer represented a career, but she could not abandon the woman who had once worn it beneath stage lights. The train left St. Louis beneath a sky the color of wet ash. Sabina watched the city recede through a soot-streaked window. Brick buildings gave way to farms, farms to open plains, and open plains to a horizon so wide it made her feel both free and terribly small. She shared the coach with farmers, laborers, traveling salesmen, women carrying infants, and immigrant families whose luggage had been tied together with rope. During the journey, she met a Hungarian widow named Ilona Varga and her two sons, Miklos and Peter. They possessed tickets to the same Montana settlement and employment papers from the Western Cascade Development Company. "What work were you promised?" Sabina asked. "Laundry at the hotel," Ilona said. "My sons will work in the kitchen until the summer season begins." Miklos, who looked no older than 17, frowned. "I was told I could study bookkeeping." "You can," his mother insisted, "once we are settled." Sabina smiled, though unease had begun to move quietly through her. At subsequent stops, more people boarded with identical envelopes. A carpenter from Iowa, 2 Italian stonecutters, a Swedish farm family, a widower from Nebraska with 3 daughters, men who had been promised railway jobs at unusually high wages, women who believed they had secured positions at a grand hotel that none of them had seen. By the time the train turned northwest, nearly half the car appeared bound for the same place. The settlement was called Bellwether Pass, though it consisted of little more than a crude depot, a construction office, a commissary, several bunkhouses, a telegraph shed, and rows of canvas tents pressed into a narrow valley between steep mountain walls. Sabina stepped from the train on May 2, 1910, and immediately knew there was no hotel. There was no foundation, no stack of lumber, no cleared building site. Nothing remotely resembled the painted illustration Edgar Verleen had enclosed with his letter. Snow still covered the upper slopes. Meltwater ran beneath the tracks in narrow brown channels. Smoke from damp wood fires hung low over the camp, stinging the eyes. Men in stained coats moved along the railbed carrying tools. Many looked exhausted. Ilona stood beside Sabina, clutching her son's arms. "Perhaps it is farther up the road," she said. A broad man in a dark overcoat emerged from the construction office. He was clean-shaven, carefully dressed, and carried a silver-topped cane despite the muddy ground. His smile had the polished quality of a man who practiced friendliness when alone. "New arrivals," he called. "Welcome to Bellwether Pass. I am Edgar Verleen, supervisor for the Western Cascade Development Company." Sabina stepped toward him. "I am Sabina Koenig. You hired me as cook for the hotel." "Of course. Miss Koenig." "Where is it?" Verleen's smile did not shift. "The hotel project has experienced a temporary delay." "How temporary?" "Construction schedules in the mountains are difficult to predict." "You wrote that it was nearly complete." "And it will be." Sabina glanced around the raw settlement. Not by supper. A few workers nearby lowered their heads to hide smiles. Verleen's eyes cooled. "You have traveled a long way. I suggest you settle in before discussing business." "I traveled because you offered a specific job. And employment is available. The company kitchen requires a cook. At $35 a month. Wages at the camp are adjusted for lodging, supplies, and transportation. You promised room and board. We provide both." He gestured toward a long, low bunkhouse with tar paper walls. "That building houses 80 men," Sabina said. "The women's quarters are behind the commissary." One of Verleen's clerks began distributing papers. Each arrival was told to sign a revised employment agreement. The document listed charges for train fare, bedding, food, tools, medical treatment, and housing. Workers would receive company credit rather than cash until their debts were repaid. Sabina read the first page twice. "This says I owe the company $48 for transportation." "Standard policy," Verleen said. "You sent the ticket without mentioning a debt. The cost was advanced on your behalf. The advertisement said it would be reimbursed. It will be, after 6 months of satisfactory employment. And if I leave before then, the balance becomes due immediately." Sabina looked at the armed guard standing near the commissary door. And how do you expect a person to pay when you do not provide cash wages? Valine tapped the contract with one gloved finger. Miss Koenig, this camp operates on a carefully managed credit system. Everyone benefits when workers remain committed. Everyone except the workers. Ilona tightened her grip on her sons. Valine leaned closer to Sabina. You may sign and begin work, or you may find your own transportation back to St. Louis. When is the next passenger train? 3 weeks. And where would I stay until then? Company property is reserved for company employees. The trap was simple because it did not need to be hidden. The mountains, the distance, and the cost of leaving did most of Valine's work for him. Sabina signed, but beside her name, she wrote, "Under protest, terms misrepresented." Valine noticed. That phrase has no legal effect. It has an effect on my memory. She was assigned to a kitchen made from rough boards with a canvas roof. The stove smoked. The work tables leaned. Supplies were stored in damp sacks. She was expected to feed more than 100 workers with one assistant, a frightened 16-year-old named Peter Varga, who had never cooked anything more complicated than porridge. Sabina began by cleaning. She ordered the spoiled flour removed, scrubbed the grease from the kettles, reorganized the stores, and demanded soap from the commissary. When the quartermaster refused, she stood in the doorway and explained in a calm voice that if illness spread through the camp, she would personally tell every worker that the company had chosen to save 12 cents rather than protect them. The soap arrived. Within a week, the food improved. Sabina made thick vegetable soup from scraps the previous cook had discarded. She mixed barley into ground beef to stretch it without leaving the workers hungry. She baked bread before dawn and saved pan drippings to enrich the evening stew. People began arriving early for meals. They also began talking to her. The carpenter from Iowa had been promised $4 a day, but received less than half after deductions. The Italian stonecutters had been charged for tools they already owned. Ilona worked 14 hours washing clothes in freezing water and was told she still owed money for her son's blankets. Men who complained were assigned to the most dangerous section of the tunnel. The tunnel cut into the western wall of the valley, beneath a slope known locally as Widow's Crown. The railway company intended to bore through nearly a mile of granite to shorten the route by 40 miles. Proper construction required timber supports, drainage channels, ventilation shafts, and frequent geological inspections. Valine treated each precaution as an expense to be reduced. Cracked beams were reused. Blasting powder was stored too close to the workface. Inspection reports were copied from earlier weeks. Men emerged coughing grey dust. Minor collapses occurred regularly and were described as ordinary settling. Sabina kept records in a small notebook beneath her mattress. She wrote names, injuries, deductions, and statements. She did not yet know what she would do with the information. She only knew that lies became stronger when no one bothered to write down the truth. The first time she saw Tomasz Wrona, he was standing on a ridge above the camp in a hard spring snow. He wore a faded canvas coat and carried a long pole over one shoulder. A line of brass bells hung from the pole, each a different size. He moved slowly, favoring his left leg, then disappeared among the pines. "Who is that?" Sabina asked Peter. "The bellkeeper." "That is not an answer." Peter lowered his voice. "He lives above the north slope. He maintains the avalanche lines and rescues people when storms close the pass." "Does the company pay him?" Peter shook his head. "The county pays a little. The railway gives him supplies when it remembers." The bells were part of an old warning system installed by miners after an avalanche buried 12 men several winters earlier. Heavy bells stood at 3 points along the valley. Smaller bells were strung on wire across unstable slopes. Movement in the snow sometimes disturbed the wires, producing irregular chimes that could warn residents below. Tomasz inspected them after storms, repaired the supports, and recorded changes in the snowpack. He also studied echoes. At first, Sabina assumed this was camp superstition. Then she learned that experienced rescuers sometimes shouted, fired blank cartridges, or struck metal to judge how sound returned from surrounding slopes. A muted response could suggest deep powder. A sharper reflection might indicate exposed ice or compacted layers. The method was imperfect, but in a valley where proper instruments were scarce, every clue mattered. Tomasz came to the kitchen only once every 10 days. He sat alone, ate quickly, and avoided conversation. His face was lean, weathered, and younger than his silence made it seem. His brown hair had begun to gray at the temples. A scar ran from beneath his left ear into his collar. His limp was unmistakable. One evening, Sabina placed a bowl of stew before him. "You need more than that," she said. He glanced up. "It is enough. You spend your days climbing mountains. I have done so before, on less. That explains why you look like a fence post." A faint change crossed his expression. Not quite a smile, but the possibility of one. She added bread and another spoonful of stew. He looked at the portion. "I did not ask. No one who needs feeding ever does." After that, he began appearing every few days. He spoke little, but he listened. Sabina learned that he had been born near Krakow and brought to the United States as a child. His father worked in Pennsylvania coal mines. Tomasz became a railway laborer, then a mountain guide, and finally a rescue worker after helping locate 2 children lost during a blizzard. The limp came from a rescue accident 6 years earlier. A bridge had failed beneath a freight wagon during a flood. Tomasz pulled the driver free, but was pinned by a timber. His left knee never healed properly. Valine mocked him openly. "Wrona knows everything about danger," he once told a group of engineers, "except how to walk away from it fast enough." Tomasz behaved as though he had not heard. Sabina heard. She carried the remark for 3 days. Her first real conversation with Tomasz occurred during a late May storm. Snow fell heavily after sunset, unusual but not unheard of at that elevation. Wind ripped a section of canvas from the kitchen roof. Sabina and Peter struggled to cover the opening while rain and snow poured across the stove. Tomasz appeared without being summoned. He climbed onto the roof, secured the canvas, and reinforced it with spare boards. When he came down, his coat was soaked and his injured leg trembled from strain. "You cannot return to your hut tonight," Sabina said. "The trail is passable. The trail is invisible. I know where it is. Then you will know where it is tomorrow." He studied her, perhaps unused to being ordered by anyone. Sabina pointed toward a chair near the stove. "Sit." He sat. Peter had already gone to check on his mother. Sabina poured coffee and found a dry blanket. The storm intensified. Wind struck the walls in long, low bursts. To distract herself from the sound, Sabina began humming while kneading dough. Tomasz raised his head. "What is that?" "A song." "I know it is a song." "Then your powers of observation remain excellent." "I meant what song?" she told him. "Sing it," he said. Sabina's hands stopped. "I was humming." "I heard." "That is all I intended." Tomasz looked toward the roof as another gust shook the boards. "Why?" She turned back to the dough. "Why what? Why do you hum when you can sing?" The question irritated her because she had no answer that did not expose something tender. "The workers are tired," she said. "They do not need an opera performance while eating beans." "I did not ask what they need." She pressed her palms harder into the dough. "I no longer perform. That is different from no longer singing." Sabina looked at him. He did not appear curious in the rude, prying manner of people who wanted pain turned into entertainment. He simply waited. She told him about the theater in St. Louis. She described Lionel Voss, the lost role, and the years of being praised for a voice, while being punished for the body that produced it. Tomasz listened without interruption. When she finished, he said, "The manager was a fool. You have never seen me on stage. I have seen Valine supervise a tunnel. A man can hold a title and remain a fool. Despite herself, Sabina laughed. The sound loosened something in her chest. She wiped flour from her hands and stood near the center of the kitchen. One song. Tomasz nodded. No criticism. I know nothing about opera. People who know nothing often provide the most criticism. I will try to disappoint you. Sabina drew a careful breath. She began softly, keeping her voice below the storm. The first phrase settled into the room, warm and low. The second rose. The canvas walls seemed to pull outward beneath the sound. Tomasz leaned forward. When she reached a sustained high note, an unusual echo returned from outside. It did not repeat cleanly. The note came back in fragments, one immediate and sharp, another delayed and dull. Tomasz lifted one hand. Again. Sabina stopped. You said no criticism. Sing the last note again. She did. He turned his head toward the western slope. Lower. She dropped the note by a third. The echo changed. Tomasz stood abruptly, forgetting his leg, and nearly fell. He caught the table. What is it? She asked. He reached for his coat. The snow above the south bunkhouse has separated. You can tell from that. I can tell something has changed. That is not the same thing. No, it is enough to inspect. He left before she could protest. An hour later, the south bunkhouse was evacuated. Shortly before dawn, a narrow slide came down behind it, crushing the storage shed and burying the back wall beneath 6 feet of snow. No one was injured. By breakfast, the story had spread through camp. Workers said Sabina had sung an avalanche from the mountain. Valine dismissed the claim as nonsense. Tomasz did not. He returned that afternoon carrying a notebook. I want to test something, he said. Sabina folded her arms. You might begin with good morning. It is afternoon. You see? Already we are making progress. He placed the notebook on the table. Inside were hand-drawn maps of the valley, weather observations, bell locations, and pages of measurements. Tomasz had recorded how long echoes took to return from different cliffs in different seasons. A human voice changes pitch more precisely than a bell, he explained. A bell gives one main tone and several overtones. You can move between notes and hold them. What exactly do you believe my voice can do? Not what the workers believe. You cannot command snow. I am relieved. But sound can help identify differences. Open ground returns one kind of echo. Deep new snow absorbs more sound. Hard layers reflect it. A hollow beneath a crust may alter the response. May? It is not certainty. What good is an uncertain warning? All warnings are uncertain until the mountain moves. They began experimenting after supper. Tomasz marked safe locations along the valley floor. Sabina sang controlled notes toward the slopes, while he timed the returning sound with a pocket watch. They repeated the tests after snowfall, thaw, wind, and freezing nights. At first, Sabina felt ridiculous. She stood in heavy boots beside a railway shed, singing scales into empty darkness, while Tomasz turned his head from side to side, like a hunting animal. Then, patterns emerged. Low notes carried farther along the valley. Higher notes revealed sharper differences near exposed rock. Certain sustained tones produced fluttering echoes near stands of timber. Others seemed to vanish into heavy powder. They never relied on sound alone. Tomasz dug snow pits, examined layers, measured temperature, watched wind direction, and inspected cornices. Sabina's voice became one more instrument in a practical system. The workers began calling it the valley call. Valine called it wasted time. You are employed as a cook, he told Sabina one morning, not a circus attraction. I conduct the tests after my work is complete. You distract the men. They are distracted by the possibility of being buried. Wrona has filled their heads with fear. Tomasz has kept several of them alive. Valine glanced toward the tunnel entrance. Production has fallen 12% since he began issuing warnings. Perhaps production should fall when the mountain becomes unstable. Valine stepped closer. Your contract requires cooperation with company operations. My contract promised a hotel. His mouth tightened. You should remember how easily your circumstances could worsen. Sabina met his gaze. So should you. Valine walked away, but from then on, one of his clerks began watching her. Summer came late to Bellwether Pass. Snow retreated from the lower slopes, revealing meadows of short grass and dark stone. The camp expanded. More workers arrived under false promises. The tunnel advanced deeper into the mountain. Sabina's relationship with Tomasz grew slowly, because neither trusted sudden happiness. He brought her wildflowers once, then claimed they had become caught in his pack. She accepted this explanation with great seriousness and placed them in a jar beside the stove. She repaired the lining of his coat. He carved her a small wooden pitch pipe. He showed her how to read the mountain weather. Feathers of snow blowing from a ridge meant high winds above. A sudden warm draft in a narrow ravine could signal changing pressure. Cracks shooting from a boot print suggested unstable layers. She taught him breathing exercises to manage pain during long climbs. Your shoulders rise when you inhale, she told him. I am breathing. Badly. I have survived 37 years doing it this way. You have also spent 37 years walking like an offended heron. He stared at her. She waited. Then he laughed so unexpectedly that he had to grip the table. It was the first time she heard the sound fully. His laughter was deep and awkward, as though unused machinery had finally begun to move. One evening in July, Tomasz invited her to his hut. It stood above the tree line on a narrow shelf overlooking the settlement. Sabina expected a rough shelter. Instead, she found a carefully ordered room with a stone hearth, shelves of rescue equipment, weather journals, and dozens of unfinished musical instruments. Violins hung from the rafters. Wooden flutes lay wrapped in cloth. Small bell frames stood on a workbench. You made these? She asked. Some. Why do you not sell them? A good instrument takes time. That was not my question. He adjusted a carving knife on the bench. I do not know if they are good. Sabina picked up a small violin. The wood had been shaped with extraordinary patience. Play it. I do not play well. Then we are fortunate there is no theater manager nearby. He looked at her, recognizing his own words returned to him. Tomasz played. His technique was imperfect, but the instrument's tone was clean and melancholy. Sabina joined him, first humming, then singing a simple melody without words. Their music moved out through the open door and across the valley. Below them, men stopped work. Women emerged from the laundry shed. Children sat on the steps of the bunkhouses. No one applauded when the song ended. The silence itself felt more respectful. Tomasz lowered the bow. You did not hide, he said. Sabina looked over the valley. There was nowhere large enough. He stepped beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Then Tomasz said, when the bridge fell, 3 people died. Sabina turned. He had never described the accident. I reached the driver, he continued. There was also a woman and her daughter trapped beneath the wagon. The current was rising. I tried to lift the axle. The timber struck my leg. By the time the others pulled me free, the wagon had shifted. His voice remained steady, but his hands tightened around the bow. The newspapers called me a hero because I saved 1 man. I knew there had been 3. You were injured. I was too slow. You were beneath a collapsed bridge. I heard the child. Sabina waited before answering. Do you believe the limp is punishment? Tomasz stared toward the settlement. Some days. Then those are the days you are wrong. He did not respond. She placed one hand over his. You did not fail because you could not perform the work of 10 men while pinned beneath a timber. Grief makes unreasonable demands. It tells us that if we had been stronger, faster, thinner, braver, or better, no one would ever have been lost. Tomasz looked down at their joined hands. How do you know? Because shame speaks with the same voice. Their first kiss was not dramatic. There was no orchestra, no curtain, and no audience waiting to decide whether Sabina looked like a woman worthy of love. Tomasz touched her face with one weathered hand and gave her time to move away. She did not. The kiss was gentle, uncertain, and honest. When they separated, Tomasz rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Only weeks? Months. That is better." By September, the tunnel had reached a section of fractured granite beneath Widow's Crown. Water seeped through the ceiling. Support beams shifted under pressure. Tomasz warned Valine that blasting should stop until an engineer inspected the slope and tunnel together. Valine refused. "The contract carries a completion bonus," Tomasz told Sabina. "He receives it if the line opens before winter." "How much?" "Enough to make him deaf." Sabina had continued documenting conditions. She now possessed copied pay records, altered contracts, names of injured men, and dates when inspections had been falsely recorded. Miklos Varga, who had been assigned to Valine's office because of his handwriting, secretly provided carbon copies of several documents. One showed that Valine had billed the railway company for new timber while purchasing damaged supports from an abandoned mine. Another proved he had charged workers for transportation costs already paid by the company. A third listed inspections supposedly conducted by an engineer who had left Montana 2 months earlier. "We must get these to the county attorney," Sabina said. "The telegraph operator reports to Valine," Miklos replied. "Then we send them by train. The guards search outgoing baggage." Tomasz examined the papers. "I can carry them over the northern pass." Sabina looked at his leg. "In autumn weather? I have crossed it before, and nearly failed to return. That was winter. The mountain does not consult the calendar." They agreed to wait for the next supply train and entrust the documents to a conductor Tomasz knew. The train never arrived. On October 18th, an early storm closed the eastern approach. Snow fell for 2 days, stopped for 6 hours, then returned with heavy wind. The upper ridges accumulated broad slabs over a layer of weak, sugary snow, left from an earlier freeze. Tomasz inspected Widow's Crown at dawn on the 3rd day. He returned pale. "The entire western face is loaded," he said. Sabina stood in the kitchen packing bread for the workers. How bad? No one should enter the tunnel. No one should remain in the lower camp. Will it slide? I do not know. That is why they must move. They activated the warning bells. The first bell stood near Tomasz's hut. The second hung beside the workers' quarters. The third, largest bell occupied an exposed wooden platform halfway up the eastern ridge. From that height, its sound could carry through the entire valley. The established emergency signal was 3 groups of 5 strokes. Tomasz rang the lower bell, while Sabina sounded a long vocal call developed during their tests. The note traveled along the valley and returned with a strange broken pulse from Widow's Crown. Tomasz listened once and said, "Again." Sabina sang. The second return was shorter. The surface was changing. Workers began leaving the bunkhouses, but Valine rode into camp shouting for them to stop. "There is no evacuation order," he declared. Tomasz approached him. "I am issuing one. You have no authority over company property. The county appointed me as avalanche warden. You are a cripple with a bell." The workers fell silent. Sabina stepped between them. "And you are a thief with a title. Only one of those things will matter when the snow comes down." Valine's face reddened. "You will return to the kitchen." "No," he turned to the foreman. "Get the tunnel crew underground. The western chamber must be cleared before the next blast." The foreman hesitated. "Mr. Valine, the support beams were moving yesterday." "They were settling. Tomasz says the slope. I do not pay Wrona to think. I pay you to move men." Several workers refused to enter. Valine opened the company ledger and began reading names. Any man abandoning his shift will lose his wages, housing credit, and transportation voucher. His family will be removed from company quarters. You cannot put children outside in a storm, Ilona said. I can enforce a contract. Fear accomplished what force could not. Men looked toward their wives and children. One by one, they began walking toward the tunnel. Sabina climbed onto a supply wagon. Listen to me! The wind caught her words. She drew the breath she once used before an aria and projected her voice across the yard. The contracts are fraudulent. The debts are false. Valine has charged you for costs already paid by the railway. He has falsified inspections and stolen money meant for safe timber. Valine pointed at her. She is lying. Miklos ran from the office carrying a packet of papers. She is not, he shouted. I copied the accounts. A guard moved toward him, but the workers closed ranks. For one moment, it seemed the truth might be enough. Then a deep sound rolled through the valley. It was not thunder. The surface of Widow's Crown settled with a low, spreading crack. Tomasz turned toward the mountain. Everyone to the northern shelf, he shouted. Now! Panic broke the crowd apart. Families ran toward the higher ground north of camp. Workers near the tunnel turned back. Valine seized the foreman's arm. Hold them! The foreman shoved him away. Another crack sounded, sharper than the first. Tomasz grabbed Sabina's shoulders. The upper bell must be rung. The lower bells are working. The wind has shifted. The tunnel crew may not hear them. Nearly 40 men were already inside the mountain. The tunnel curved after the first several hundred feet. Machinery, blasting, and stone walls could swallow the lower alarms. What about the telegraph? Sabina asked. I tried. The line is down. They looked toward the high bell platform across the valley. The staircase climbed an exposed slope through blowing snow. I will go, Tomasz said. You cannot reach it quickly enough. I can climb. Not before the slide releases. His jaw hardened. Sabina, you go to the tunnel. You know the evacuation route. I know the bell signal. The platform is exposed. That is why the sound carries. I will not let you. You are not letting me do anything. He caught her hand. The fear in his face was greater than any she had seen. The tower may not stand, and the tunnel certainly will not. A third crack echoed from Widow's Crown. Sabina stepped close and held his face between her palms. You taught me to listen to the mountain. Listen now. Those men need you below. And I need you alive. Then lead them out quickly. She kissed him once and ran. The climb to the bell platform was steeper than it appeared from the camp. Snow covered the wooden steps. Wind pressed against her broad body, tearing at her coat and filling her mouth when she tried to breathe. Sabina gripped the railing and pulled herself upward. She had spent years being told her body was a burden, too heavy for romance, too broad for elegance, too visible for the stage. On the mountain, her weight anchored her. Her powerful calves drove her up each step. Her wide stance kept her balanced when the platform shook. Her lungs, trained through decades of disciplined breathing, drew air through the cold without surrendering to panic. Below, Tomasz reached the tunnel. He ordered 2 men to bring lanterns and ropes. The main entrance had begun to shift. Dust fell from the ceiling. Workers farther inside had heard nothing. Tomasz entered. He struck a handbell as he moved, then shouted the evacuation command. The sound traveled poorly through the curved passage. At the first chamber, he found 6 men gathering tools. Leave them, he said. The company charges us for lost equipment, one replied. The company will not matter in 10 minutes. They followed. Deeper inside, Tomasz's injured leg began to fail. He leaned against the wall, forced his breathing into the rhythm Sabina had taught him, and continued. On the ridge, Sabina reached the bell platform. The structure stood 40 feet above the slope on thick timber posts. The bell itself weighed nearly 300 pounds. Its rope was stiff with ice. She pulled. Nothing happened. She wrapped the rope around both hands and hauled downward. The bell moved slightly, but did not strike. Wind screamed through the beams. Sabina looked up and saw ice packed around the bell's pivot. She climbed onto the railing, took a wooden maintenance mallet from its hook, and struck the frozen mechanism. Ice broke loose in sharp pieces. The mountain gave another long groan. Sabina grabbed the rope. This time, the bell rang. The first blow rolled across the valley. She rang it 5 times, paused, then 5 more. Inside the tunnel, Tomasz heard only a faint vibration through the stone. He counted. 5. A pause. 5. "Move!" he shouted. Men began running toward the entrance. Sabina completed the 3rd group of strokes, but the wind scattered the sound toward the southern end of camp. She could see workers near the tunnel mouth looking around in confusion. The bell alone was not enough. She stepped to the edge of the platform and faced the valley. Her throat was dry from cold. Snow struck her cheeks. She inhaled slowly, expanding her ribs the way Elias Barrett had taught her in a warm St. Louis studio 17 years earlier. Then Sabina sang. She did not choose an opera aria. Ornament and beauty had no purpose here. She sang the clear emergency tone she and Tomasz had practiced. A sustained note, a descending interval, then 3 short calls. The sound carried. It passed over the roofs, struck the eastern cliff, and returned toward the tunnel entrance. Men below heard it. Women on the northern shelf turned. Children stopped crying. Inside the tunnel, the note entered as a low vibration before becoming recognizable. Tomasz closed his eyes for half a second. "She made it," he whispered. He reached the deepest active chamber and found 11 workers still loading broken stone. "Evacuate." The shift boss shook his head. "Valine ordered us to clear the chamber. Valine is outside." He said the warnings were false. Sabina's call sounded again through the rock. The men looked upward. Dust streamed from the beams. Tomasz pointed toward the passage. "Does that sound false?" They ran. On the bell platform, Sabina repeated the signal until her voice roughened. She used controlled breaths, refusing to shout. Shouting would destroy her throat and reduce the distance. She placed each note carefully, directing it toward the cliff that returned the clearest echo. Between calls, she rang the bell. Below, the settlement emptied. Valine remained near the construction office with 2 clerks, trying to load account books and cash boxes into a wagon. Ilona saw him. "He is taking the money." Several workers changed direction. Tomasz emerged from the tunnel with the first group. "Leave him," he shouted. "Get to the shelf." Valine climbed onto the wagon. "You fools," he yelled. "There will be no avalanche." The upper slope broke. At first, it looked like a white line opening across the mountain. Then the entire face of Widow's Crown began to move. The sound arrived a moment later. It was deeper than thunder, a continuous roar of snow, timber, and stone accelerating down the western wall. Tomasz counted the workers leaving the tunnel. 32. "Who is missing?" 4 from the drilling crew, someone said. Tomasz turned back. The tunnel mouth was already shedding rock. A hand caught his coat. It was Miklos. "You cannot go. There are 4 men. The entrance will collapse." Tomasz looked toward the ridge. Sabina was still on the platform. She rang the final group of 5. Then she saw movement near the tunnel. 4 men stumbled from a ventilation opening farther south, waving their arms. She changed the signal, singing 2 short calls toward Tomasz. He recognized the pattern they had created for a located party. He looked south and saw them. "All accounted for," he shouted. "Move!" The crowd climbed toward the northern shelf. Valine's wagon became stuck in deep snow. He whipped the horse, then abandoned the vehicle and ran after the others. The avalanche struck the lower camp. The first impact flattened the southern bunkhouse. Snow burst through walls and lifted roofs as though they were paper. The construction office disappeared. Rail cars overturned. The tunnel entrance vanished beneath a wave of debris. The air filled with white. On the eastern ridge, wind from the avalanche hit the bell platform. The tower lurched. Sabina wrapped both arms around a support beam. The bell swung wildly above her. One of the rear posts cracked. The platform tilted toward the valley. She tried to reach the stairs, but a section of railing tore free. The floor dropped beneath her left foot. She caught the bell rope and swung against the timber frame. "Sabina!" Tomasz's voice came from below, though she could barely hear it through the roar. The upper portion of the tower began to collapse. Sabina looked down. The snow at the base of the ridge was moving, but the main avalanche had crossed farther south. Beneath the platform lay a steep bank of new powder, perhaps deep enough to soften a fall, perhaps not. Remaining on the tower meant being crushed. She released the rope. For a terrifying instant, the world became sky, snow, and broken wood. Sabina struck the slope on her side. Pain flashed through her shoulder. Then she rolled, gathering snow around her, unable to stop. She remembered Tomasz's instructions. Protect the face, keep the feet downhill, fight to remain near the surface. She covered her mouth with one arm and spread the other wide. Her body slowed in the deep powder and stopped against a small pine. Snow settled over her legs and waist. She could breathe. Above, the remainder of the bell platform collapsed. The great bell fell into the slope and buried itself several yards away. Sabina tried to move. Her right shoulder burned. One leg was trapped beneath packed snow. She shouted, but her voice emerged weak and ragged. Below, Tomasz saw the tower fall. Every sound in the valley narrowed to silence. He began moving toward the ridge. Miklos caught his arm. "The slope is still moving." Tomasz pulled free. His limp became more pronounced as he crossed the debris. Snow reached his knees. Broken boards and twisted rail lay beneath the surface. He called Sabina's name. No answer. He stopped and forced himself to think. Panic was noise. Rescue required listening. He studied the slope. The broken tower marked the upper point. The fall line led northeast. A small pine leaned beneath fresh snow. Then he heard one faint note. Sabina was not calling his name. She was singing the emergency location tone. It lasted less than 2 seconds before breaking, but it was enough. Tomasz changed direction and climbed toward the pine. He found the edge of her coat beneath the snow. "Sabina!" She opened her eyes. "I believe," she said through chattering teeth, "the tower requires repairs." Tomasz dropped beside her with a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "Do not move. I had not planned to dance." He dug around her leg with his hands. 2 workers reached them with shovels. Together, they freed her and placed her on a blanket. Her shoulder was dislocated, but not broken. Her ankle was badly sprained. She had cuts across her face and hands, but she was alive. Tomasz knelt beside her. "You stayed too long. The final crew had not come out. You could have died. So could they. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I heard you fall. I heard you find me." The avalanche destroyed most of Bellwether Pass, but the evacuation saved every worker and family member. Several people suffered broken bones, cuts, and exposure. No one died. The tunnel was sealed beneath thousands of tons of snow and rock. The survivors spent the night on the northern shelf beneath canvas shelters. Tomasz and the uninjured workers organized fires, first aid, food, and watches for additional slides. Sabina lay wrapped in blankets while Ilona supported her injured arm. Valine sat apart from the others, guarded by 3 tunnel workers. At dawn, when the clouds lifted, he began constructing his defense. "This disaster occurred because Wrona created panic," he told the workers. "The evacuation was disorderly. Equipment was abandoned. Company property was destroyed." A man named Joseph Bell, whose life Tomasz had saved inside the tunnel, stared at him. "The mountain destroyed the property." The tunnel might have survived if procedures had been followed. The entrance is under 50 feet of snow. Valine turned to the group. You are laborers, not engineers. When railway officials arrive, they will require facts. Wrona trespassed in the tunnel and interfered with operations. Miss Koenig incited workers to violate their contracts. Sabina slowly sat up. Pain crossed her face, but her voice remained steady. You still believe the contracts will protect you? They are legally signed documents, obtained through fraud. An accusation made by a disgruntled cook. Miklos brought forward the packet of copied accounts. Valine smiled. Stolen papers, meaningless without the originals. Sabina looked toward the remains of the construction office. You tried to take the originals in your wagon. The workers followed her gaze. The wagon stood half-buried near the edge of the debris field. One wheel and part of the driver's bench remained visible. Valine's expression changed. Tomasz organized a careful recovery after the slope stabilized. Inside the wagon, they found a steel cash box, payroll ledgers, company correspondence, blank contracts, forged inspection forms, and letters from Valine, describing his plan to recruit laborers through false advertisements. One letter was especially damaging. It explained that foreign workers and widows were preferable because they had fewer resources, limited local connections, and a greater tolerance for undesirable conditions when departure is made financially impossible. Sabina read the sentence aloud to the camp. No one spoke for several moments. Ilona stepped forward. My sons were never hotel workers. No, Sabina said. There was never a hotel. No. Joseph Bell and 2 others blocked him. You cannot hold me, Valine said. You have no lawful authority. Tomasz took the county avalanche badge from inside his coat. I have authority to detain anyone who endangered residents during a declared emergency. You are not a sheriff. No, the sheriff will arrive when the pass opens. Valine glanced at the surrounding workers. For the first time since Sabina had met him, he looked afraid. The survivors remained in temporary shelters for 9 days. A rescue train reached them after crews cleared the eastern track. The county sheriff, a railway investigator, and a state labor official arrived together. Valine was arrested on charges related to fraud, theft, falsified safety records, and reckless endangerment. His 2 senior clerks agreed to testify in exchange for reduced charges. The railway company denied knowledge of his scheme, but the recovered letters revealed that several regional officials had ignored complaints because the tunnel project was ahead of schedule. An investigation followed. Workers' debts were cancelled. Back wages were calculated in cash. Families received transportation assistance and temporary housing. The company was ordered to establish independent safety inspections before construction could resume. Newspapers from Helena to Chicago reported the story. Many focused on the remarkable evacuation system that combined bells, vocal signals, and the valley's natural echoes. Journalists called Sabina the singing sentinel of Bellwether Pass. One paper printed an illustration of a slender woman in a flowing gown standing gracefully beside a bell. Sabina laughed when she saw it. They have reduced me by half. Tomasz examined the drawing. They have also made the tower much taller. That is because accuracy would interfere with their sense of drama. Reporters asked whether she planned to return to opera. Offers arrived from theaters that had never heard her sing. Managers who once ignored her now praised her heroism and proposed benefit concerts. Lionel Voss sent a telegram claiming he had always recognized her extraordinary talent. Sabina read it twice, folded it carefully, and used it to light the stove. She did sing publicly again, but not in the way others expected. During the winter after the avalanche, she and Tomasz traveled to mining and railway settlements across Montana. They demonstrated emergency signaling, breathing control, vocal projection, and practical methods for communicating when telegraph lines failed. Sabina taught workers how to send clear calls without damaging their throats. She showed rescue teams how posture and breath could extend a warning across a windy valley. She trained women and older children as signalers, because emergencies did not wait for designated men to be available. Tomasz taught snow assessment, route marking, bell maintenance, basic first aid, and organized search patterns. He continued to limp. Some days the pain forced him to use a cane. He no longer described the limp as proof of failure. "It is evidence," Sabina once told him, "that you remained after something tried to break you." In the spring of 1912, they established the Bellwether Mountain Rescue School on a safer ridge north of the old settlement. The school consisted of a main lodge, a training tower, equipment sheds, and a kitchen large enough to feed 50 students. Sabina insisted on the kitchen. "Rescuers who cannot make soup are only half-trained," she declared. Railway companies, mining firms, county governments, and volunteer groups sent students. Some came unwillingly, ordered by employers newly afraid of public scandal. Most left changed. The school's methods were practical rather than theatrical. Sabina never claimed that singing alone could predict an avalanche. She taught that echoes offered clues, not certainty. Every sound test had to be supported by weather records, snow pits, visual inspection, and conservative judgment. "When the mountain gives 3 warnings," she told students, "do not wait for a 4th, because a supervisor dislikes delay." Tomasz built improved bell systems with interchangeable tones. He designed portable signal frames that could be carried by rescue teams. His hand-carved pitch pipes became standard equipment at the school. Years later, former students carried their methods into mountain towns throughout the West. Some adapted the vocal signals for forest fires. Others used them in mines, canyons, and flood zones. Railway crews installed clearer evacuation codes. County officials funded permanent rescue stations. Sabina's voice saved lives long after the avalanche at Bellwether Pass, though not always because she herself was present. It lived in the breath training she taught, the signal patterns she created, and the confidence she gave people who had once believed only powerful officials were permitted to raise an alarm. She and Tomasz married quietly in the school lodge during the summer of 1913. Ilona baked the wedding cake. Miklos, now studying accounting in Helena, kept the school's books. Peter became a rescue medic. Joseph Bell served as best man. Sabina wore the black performance gown she had carried from St. Louis. She altered it herself, adding dark blue fabric to the sleeves and a silver sash at the waist. Before the ceremony, she stood before a mirror while Ilona arranged her curls. For years, Sabina had looked into mirrors, searching for the defects other people promised were there. She had examined her stomach, her arms, her hips, and her face, as though preparing evidence against herself. That morning, she saw a woman whose body had carried her up a frozen tower. She saw shoulders strong enough to hold a bell rope. She saw lungs trained by discipline. She saw the face Tomasz looked toward whenever he entered a room. "You are smiling," Ilona said. "I am practicing." "For what?" "For being seen." During the ceremony, Tomasz walked with his cane. He did not hide it behind his leg. When Sabina joined him, he took both her hands. The officiant asked whether they had prepared vows. Tomasz nodded. He looked at Sabina for a long moment. "You taught me that saving a life does not always mean preventing every loss," he said. "Sometimes it means helping a person return to the part of themselves they buried. You returned my courage to me. You returned music to my home. I will spend the rest of my life making room for your voice." Sabina's eyes filled with tears. "When I came west," she said, "I believed I had lost the only place where my voice mattered. You showed me that a stage is only one kind of platform. You never asked me to become smaller so you could feel larger. You listened. I promised to listen to you, to stand beside you, and to remind you that a wounded leg does not make a wounded man." After the vows, Sabina sang. Her voice filled the lodge, traveled through the open windows, and crossed the valley that had once nearly taken everything from them. No manager selected her costume. No investor approved her appearance. No audience decided whether she was believable as a woman in love. She simply was. In later years, visitors sometimes asked Sabina whether she regretted leaving conventional opera. She always considered the question seriously. "I regret that the theatre lacked imagination," she would say, "but I do not regret learning that music can serve more than applause." She still loved opera. She performed annual concerts at the rescue school to raise money for injured workers and widowed families. Her audiences arrived in work coats, uniforms, Sunday dresses, and muddy boots. They listened from wooden benches while Tomasz accompanied her on one of his violins. No one asked whether her body fit the role. Her body was the reason the role existed. The old Bellwether settlement was never rebuilt in the same location. The railway eventually completed a safer route around Widow's Crown after independent engineers declared the tunnel permanently unstable. A memorial was placed near the northern shelf, not for those who died, because no one had, but for those who chose to believe a warning before proof arrived in the form of disaster. The inscription did not mention Valine. It read, "A voice raised in truth is never wasted." Sabina stood before the memorial on the 20th anniversary of the avalanche. Her hair had begun to silver. Tomasz leaned on a heavier cane. Around them gathered rescue workers, former laborers, families, students, and children who knew the story only through their parents. A young girl approached Sabina after the ceremony. She was perhaps 13, tall and broad for her age, with a round face and nervous hands. "My teacher says I sing too loudly," the girl said. Sabina crouched slightly so they could speak eye to eye. "Do you sing carelessly?" "No." "Do you listen to the people singing beside you?" "Yes." "Can you control your breath?" "I am learning." "Then your voice is not too loud. It is not yet fully trained." The girl looked uncertain. "Is there a difference?" "There is all the difference in the world." Sabina gave her one of the school's wooden pitch pipes. "Power without control becomes noise," she said. "Control without courage becomes silence. Learn both." The girl closed her fingers around the instrument. Behind them, a bell sounded from the training tower. Its clear note traveled across the valley and returned from the mountains in a series of fading echoes. Sabina listened until the final echo disappeared. Once, she had believed acceptance meant finding a place willing to tolerate her. She had been wrong. Acceptance was not permission granted by a manager, an audience, an employer, or a stranger. It began when she stopped treating her own existence as an inconvenience. Tomasz joined her beside the memorial. "What do you hear?" he asked. She listened to the wind moving over the ridge, the students calling signals, the bells answering one another, and the distant sound of young voices practicing controlled notes. "A safe valley," she said. He smiled. "So do I." The lesson of Sabina and Tomasz was carried forward by everyone they trained. No person should be measured by the narrow expectations of others. A body that does not fit society's preferred shape may still possess extraordinary strength. A limp may mark survival rather than failure. A rejected voice may become the very voice a community needs most. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act with skill, compassion, and integrity when fear is justified. And when people refuse to shrink, remain silent, or accept injustice as inevitable, the gifts once dismissed by the world can become powerful enough to save it.